You think it's lust, but it's actually emptiness. These haunting words from Carl Jung expose one of the most devastating truths about modern relationships that nobody wants to acknowledge. What you mistake for passion, for desire, for sexual chemistry, Jung discovered it's actually your psyche desperately trying to fill a void that can never be satisfied through another person. Right now, millions of people are chasing sexual experiences, jumping from partner to partner or staying trapped in toxic relationships because they believe what they're feeling is love or attraction. But Jung's revolutionary insight reveals something far more disturbing. Most of what we call sexual desire is actually spiritual hunger wearing a mask. This isn't about morality or religious shame. This is about psychological reality. Jung discovered that when you're operating from inner emptiness, your sexuality becomes a drug, temporarily numbing the pain but never healing the wound. And the more you chase this false satisfaction, the emptier you become. If you're tired of empty relationships, meaningless hookups, or feeling unsatisfied no matter how much attention or sex you get, hit that subscribe button right now, because what Jung discovered about the connection between emptiness and lust will completely transform how you understand your own desires and finally show you the path to genuine fulfillment. Carl Jung wasn't just observing human behavior from the outside. He was diving deep into the human psyche, uncovering truths that most people spend their entire lives avoiding. Through decades of analyzing dreams, treating patients, and exploring his own psychological depths, Jung made a shocking discovery about what drives our sexual and romantic obsessions. He found that underneath most sexual compulsions, relationship, addictions, and romantic fantasies lies what he called the existential void, a deep sense of meaninglessness and disconnection from your authentic self. When you don't know who you are or why you exist, your psyche desperately searches for something to fill that emptiness, and nothing seems to promise fulfillment quite like sexual desire. The intensity of lust feels like meaning. The chemistry of attraction feels like purpose. The pursuit of romantic conquest feels like you're moving towards something important. But Jung discovered this is all an elaborate psychological illusion. What you think is your libido calling out for satisfaction is actually your soul crying out for wholeness. What feels like sexual hunger is actually spiritual starvation. What seems like romantic love is often just two empty people trying to complete themselves through each other. Jung called this phenomenon projection of the anima and animus, the unconscious attempt to find your missing psychological pieces in another person. When you don't know yourself deeply, you project your unlived potential onto others and then become obsessed with possessing them. This is why you can feel such intense attraction to someone you barely know. This is why sexual chemistry can feel more powerful than love itself. This is why you can become completely obsessed with someone who treats you badly. You're not responding to who they actually are. You're responding to what your empty psyche believes they can give you. Jung discovered that people operating from this emptiness create what he called psychological vampirism in relationships. They don't love their partners, they consume them. They don't desire connection, they desire possession. They don't want intimacy, they want to use someone else's energy to temporarily fill their void. But here's where Jung's insight becomes truly disturbing. And this will explain every toxic relationship pattern you've ever experienced or witnessed. Jung found that when two empty people come together, they create what he called mutual psychological cannibalism. Each person is trying to extract from the other what they lack within themselves. The relationship becomes a desperate transaction where both people are simultaneously trying to take and terrified of giving. This creates the push-pull dynamic, the drama, the intensity that people often mistake for passion. You've seen this pattern, the couple that can't stay together but can't stay apart. the relationship that's full of fighting and make-up sex, the people who say they love each other but constantly hurt each other. Jung revealed that this isn't love at all. It's two people trying to fill their emptiness by consuming each other. The sex in these relationships isn't about pleasure or connection. It's about temporary relief from existential pain. The drama isn't about passion. It's about the desperate fear of being alone with your own emptiness. Jung's most shocking discovery was that our hypersexualized culture isn't a sign of sexual liberation. It's a symptom of mass spiritual emptiness. When entire societies lose connection to meaning, purpose, and authentic identity, sexuality becomes a collective drug used to numb the pain of existential void. This explains why no amount of sexual experience seems to satisfy people. Why porn? Consumption keeps escalating. Why hookup culture leaves people feeling more empty than before. Why even people in committed relationships often feel sexually unsatisfied despite having regular access to sex. Jung found that when sexuality is used to fill emptiness rather than express wholeness, it becomes addictive and ultimately destructive. The more you use sex or romantic fantasy to escape from yourself, the more disconnected from yourself you become. The more disconnected you become, the more desperately you crave sexual experiences to feel alive. This creates what Jung called the cycle of psychological hunger, where you mistake the temporary high of sexual excitement for genuine nourishment, but each experience leaves you hungrier than before. Now here's something that will completely change how you see your own relationship patterns. And this insight alone will save you years of confusion and heartbreak. Jung discovered that you can tell whether you're operating from wholeness or emptiness by examining the quality of your sexual desires. When you're psychologically whole, sexuality becomes an expression of your fullness rather than an attempt to fill your emptiness. You're attracted to people who enhance your life rather than people you believe will complete you. You desire connection rather than consumption. But when you're operating from emptiness, your sexuality becomes compulsive, desperate, and ultimately unsatisfying. You're attracted to people who trigger your wounds rather than people who complement your strengths. You desire possession rather than partnership. Jung identified specific patterns that reveal when lust is actually masked emptiness. First, you become obsessed with people who are unavailable, inappropriate, or harmful to you. Your empty psyche is drawn to what Jung called the forbidden fruit, because the pursuit itself provides temporary distraction from inner void. Second, you find yourself constantly fantasizing about sexual or romantic scenarios rather than being present in your actual relationships. Jung discovered that excessive fantasy is often the psyche's attempt to create artificial meaning when real meaning is absent from your life. Third, you experience what Jung called post-coital depression, feeling empty, sad, or disconnected after sexual experiences that you expected to fulfill you. This isn't about physical satisfaction. It's your psyche recognizing that you used sexuality to avoid rather than address your deeper needs. Fourth, you find yourself jumping from relationship to relationship or sexual experience to sexual experience, always believing the next one will finally satisfy you. Jung found this pattern indicates you're trying to use others to fill a void that can only be filled from within. But here's where Jung's insight becomes practical and life-changing. And this is the part that will transform your entire approach to relationships and sexuality. Jung discovered that the cure for emptiness-driven lust isn't suppressing your desires or avoiding relationships. It's learning to fill yourself from within first. Jung called this process individuation, the journey of becoming psychologically whole and complete as an individual. When you know who you are, what you value, and why you exist, Your sexuality transforms from desperate hunger into joyful expression. This doesn't mean becoming cold or uninterested in relationships. It means becoming so fulfilled within yourself that relationships become about sharing your fullness rather than trying to extract fulfillment from others. Jung found that people who have done the work of filling their inner emptiness experience sexuality in completely different ways. Instead of desperate craving, they feel natural desire. Instead of obsessive fantasizing, they experience present moment pleasure. Instead of post-sexual emptiness, they feel deeper connection and satisfaction. Most importantly, they're attracted to psychologically healthy partners rather than people who trigger their wounds. When you're operating from wholeness, you naturally repel people who are trying to use you to fill their emptiness. And you attract people who want to share genuine intimacy. But Jung also discovered something that most self-help advice ignores. Filling your inner emptiness isn't just about positive thinking or surface-level personal development. It requires what he called shadow work, confronting and integrating the parts of yourself you've been avoiding or rejecting. Your emptiness often comes from disconnection from your authentic self. Over years of trying to be who others wanted you to be, following social expectations or avoiding difficult emotions, you lost touch with your true nature. This disconnection creates the void that you then try to fill through sexual experiences. Here's something that will shock you about your own relationship history. And this realization will explain every confusing dynamic you've ever experienced. Jung discovered that the people you're most sexually attracted to are often reflecting back your own unlived psychological potential. If you're attracted to confident people, you might be disconnected from your own confidence. If you're drawn to mysterious or unavailable people, you might be avoiding your own depth and complexity. If you crave someone who seems whole or together, you're probably sensing in them what you haven't developed in yourself. This is why sexual obsession feels so intense. You're not just attracted to a person, you're attracted to the parts of yourself that you see reflected in them. But Jung found that trying to possess someone else's qualities through relationship or sex never works. You have to develop those qualities within yourself. Jung's research revealed that the most sexually satisfied people aren't those with the most experience or the best techniques. They're those who have the deepest relationship with themselves. When you know yourself completely, when you've faced your shadows and integrated your wholeness, sexuality becomes a natural expression of who you are rather than a desperate attempt to become someone else. This is why Jung emphasized that the work of psychological wholeness must happen individually before it can be shared in relationship. You can't skip the inner work and expect outer relationships to fill the gap. Every attempt to do so creates the very emptiness and dissatisfaction you're trying to escape. But Jung also discovered that our culture actively prevents this inner work from happening. We're constantly distracted by external pursuits, social media, entertainment, and yes, sexual stimulation. These distractions keep us from facing the emptiness that would motivate us to do the deeper work of becoming whole. Now, here's the most profound part of Jung's discovery, and this insight will change everything about how you approach your own healing and relationships. Jung found that the emptiness itself isn't the enemy. The emptiness is actually your psyche's way of calling you toward your authentic self. That restless feeling, that sense that something is missing, that hunger that sex or romance can't satisfy. Jung discovered that these are all signals from your deeper self, trying to guide you toward the inner work that will make you whole. Most people spend their lives running from these feelings, using various addictions and distractions to avoid the discomfort of emptiness. But Jung found that when you learn to sit with the emptiness, to listen to what it's trying to tell you, it becomes the doorway to your authentic self. The practical application of Jung's insight requires what he called active imagination, learning to dialogue with your emptiness instead of trying to fill it or escape from it. When you feel sexual obsession or romantic craving, instead of immediately pursuing satisfaction, you pause and ask, what is this feeling really trying to tell me about what I need to develop within myself? Jung found that sexual compulsions often mask specific developmental needs. If you're obsessed with powerful people, you might need to develop your own power. If you crave nurturing partners, you might need to learn to nurture yourself. If you are drawn to creative or artistic people, you might need to express your own creativity. This doesn't mean suppressing your desires or avoiding relationships. It means using your desires as information about your own psychological development, rather than just seeking immediate gratification. When you begin to fill yourself from within, developing the qualities you seek in others, pursuing meaning and purpose, creating authentic self-expression, something remarkable happens. Your sexuality transforms from desperate hunger into joyful sharing. Jung called this transformation the integration of eros, when sexual energy becomes aligned with psychological wholeness rather than driven by psychological emptiness. People who achieve this integration report much more satisfying relationships and sexual experiences, not because they're having more sex, but because their sexuality expresses their authentic self rather than their desperate needs. But Jung warned that this transformation requires patience and commitment. The habits of using sexuality to avoid emptiness are deeply ingrained, and the instant gratification of sexual stimulation is much easier than the long-term work of becoming psychologically whole. Jung discovered that the journey from emptiness-driven lust to wholeness-based sexuality happens in stages. First, you must recognize when you're operating from emptiness rather than authenticity. This requires honest self-examination and the willingness to see your patterns clearly. Second, you must learn to tolerate the discomfort of unfilled desire long enough to understand what it's really asking for. Instead of immediately seeking sexual or romantic stimulation when you feel empty, you sit with the feeling and explore its deeper message. Third, you begin the work of developing internally what you've been seeking externally. If you crave confidence, you work on building genuine self-confidence. If you seek security, you learn to create security within yourself. If you want love, you begin practicing self-love. Fourth, you start expressing your developing wholeness through authentic relationships rather than using relationships to avoid your emptiness. This means choosing partners who complement your strengths rather than fill your gaps, and offering your gifts rather than seeking to extract what you lack. Jung found that people who complete this transformation experience what he called psychological alchemy, the conversion of base desires into genuine gold. Their relationships become deeper, their sexuality more satisfying, and their overall sense of fulfillment dramatically increases. But Jung also observed that most people resist this transformation because it requires giving up the familiar comfort of emptiness-driven patterns. It's easier to stay stuck in cycles of sexual obsession and romantic drama than to do the uncomfortable work of becoming psychologically whole. The irony Jung discovered is that the very emptiness people are running from through sexual compulsion is actually the doorway to the fulfillment they're seeking. But you have to stop running long enough to walk through that doorway. Jung's insight reveals why modern dating culture creates so much suffering. When empty people try to fill themselves through dating apps, hookups, and serial relationships, they create more emptiness rather than less. Each unsuccessful attempt to find fulfillment through others reinforces the belief that you are incomplete and need someone else to make you whole. This creates what Jung called psychological dependency. The belief that your happiness, security, and sense of self-worth depend on external validation and romantic success. The more dependent you become, the more desperate your sexual and romantic pursuits become, and the less satisfying your actual experiences are. Jung found that breaking this cycle requires what he called conscious celibacy, not permanent avoidance of sexuality, but temporary abstinence from sexual and romantic pursuit while you do the inner work of becoming whole. This allows you to face your emptiness directly instead of constantly medicating it through sexual experiences. During this period of conscious celibacy, you learn to generate internally what you've been seeking externally. You develop your own sense of purpose, create meaningful work, build authentic friendships, and cultivate practices that connect you to your deeper self. Jung discovered that when you emerge from this process of inner work, your entire relationship to sexuality and romance transforms. You're no longer driven by desperate need, but by genuine desire. You're no longer seeking completion, but offering wholeness. You're no longer trying to escape yourself, but express yourself. This doesn't mean you become uninterested in relationships or sexuality. It means you become interested in authentic connection rather than psychological rescue. You become attracted to people who inspire you rather than people you think will fix you. Jung's ultimate insight about the connection between lust and emptiness reveals that the spiritual and sexual aren't opposite. They're intimately connected. When you're spiritually fulfilled, sexually connected to your authentic self, and psychologically whole, your sexuality becomes a sacred expression rather than a desperate addiction. This is why Jung said that the cure for sexual compulsion isn't sexual restriction, but spiritual fulfillment. When you know who you are, why you exist, and what you're called to contribute to the world, your sexual energy naturally aligns with your authentic purpose rather than fighting against it. The people who achieve this integration report that their relationships become deeper, their sexual experiences more satisfying, and their overall sense of life satisfaction dramatically increases. But more importantly, they stop being driven by the desperate hunger that masquerades as sexual desire. Jung's words, "You think it's lust, but it's actually emptiness," aren't meant to shame or suppress your desires. They're meant to liberate you from the exhausting cycle of trying to fill an internal void through external experiences. When you understand that your deepest hungers are actually calling you toward your authentic self, everything changes. Your emptiness becomes your guide rather than your enemy. Your unfulfilled desires become information about your unlived potential rather than evidence of your inadequacy. The journey from emptiness-driven lust to wholeness-based sexuality isn't easy, but Jung discovered it's the only path to genuine satisfaction. It requires courage to face yourself, patience to do the inner work, and wisdom to distinguish between what your body wants and what your soul needs. But for those willing to take this journey, Jung promised something extraordinary: sexuality that enhances rather than depletes you, relationships that fulfill rather than drain you, and a sense of completeness that no external experience could ever provide. Your transformation from emptiness to wholeness starts with recognition. If Jung's insights revealed patterns in your own life, if you recognize the difference between authentic desire and desperate hunger, then you're ready for the deeper work. Subscribe to this channel and hit that notification bell to continue exploring Jung's revolutionary insights about psychology, relationships, and the path to authentic fulfillment. And leave a comment sharing which part of Jung's teaching hit home for you. Your insight might help someone else recognize their own patterns. Remember, the emptiness you're running from through lust and romance is actually the doorway to the wholeness you're seeking, but you have to stop running long enough to walk through it.